What is going on, guys? I'm Zach Masick. This is the Dead Warrior Society. We're doing something a little different today. I'm starting a new segment of the show, if you will. I don't know what it's called. I was kind of riffing off of Jerry Seinfeld's Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, and I think it's going to be something like Vet Bros drinking caffeine, talking about historians. It's not whimsical. It sucks, to be quite honest with you. So, with that said, if any of you have a better title for this segment, jump into the comments. Let me know. I'm happy to hijack or steal one of your ideas. Usually you guys have really good insight of things that I just never thought of. So yeah, let me know what you want me to call this segment. But in this episode, we are going to focus on one specific historian. Usually people do like book reviews, and I thought about doing a book review, but then I thought it would be even better, since I read so many books by very often the same authors, that if I just talked about the historian themselves and then also obviously the work that they've done. Real quick sidebar, because we have a sponsor. If you've got a truck with a cap and you like being outside but don't love sleeping on the ground, there is a setup from DAC Tents. It's DAC Tents, spelled DAC, that you should definitely check out. No poles, no drama. Just toss it over the shell and boom, you've got yourself a weatherproof camp setup in minutes. They've got options for different truck sizes and SUVs. Hit the link in the description to learn more and use code DEADWARRIOR for 15% off. That is DEADWARRIOR for 15% off. Okay. Back in the day, for those of you who don't know, I went to school in New York City and I was at Columbia, and I had this professor whose name was Hamid Debashi. You probably have never heard of him. He has some videos on YouTube for sure. He's written a few books, and he taught my class on, I think it was contemporary Islamic studies or something like that. And of course, he was just basically cookie cutter reiterating everything from Edward Said in Orientalism. And a lot of it was absolute nonsense, to be quite honest with you. And for most of his lectures, I just felt absolutely lost. He spoke beautifully. I mean, his capacity to leverage vocabulary, it sounds like poetry when he talks. But when you try to figure out what he's saying exactly or precisely, or what arguments he is presenting, it is nigh impossible. And this is true with his books, by the way. If you can get a grasp on what he is trying to claim, good luck. It's going to be, like I said, nearly impossible. But I was desperate to find somebody who had some kind of dialogue that disagreed with him and his ideas, which I found, again, just to be nonsensical. And there's just really no one in the class was willing to do it, because we were students and we just want to pass and move on with our lives. All of his TAs, obviously, they're not going to do it. And there was, obviously, with any sort of academic life or when you're going to college, there's just no debate. There is one argument. You're not allowed to disagree with that argument. Is that the West is imperial and colonial, and all of the sort of woes that are going on in the world can be reduced to, in terms of explaining why they are happening, whether it's in Africa or the Middle East, all of it is to be blamed on the West and imperialism, which was like over 100 years ago. Anyways, so in a desperate attempt to find somebody arguing with Hamid Debashi, I got on YouTube. And this was back in the early 2010s, I guess. It was my first or second semester at school, so it had to have been 2014. And I found a young Raymond Ibrahim, and he had this sort of like low-level debate with Hamid. It's still on YouTube. I actually rewatched it the other night. It's very entertaining. You should go check it out. The quality of the video and the audio are not great, but you still get all of it. It's a lot of fun to watch, just what they're saying to each other. So go check it out. Anyways, that's how I found Raymond. And some years later, he wrote, I think, what is arguably his most well-known book, which is Sword and Scimitar. And then eventually he wrote Defenders of the West. But before any of this, when he was a young lad, if you will, in the early 2000s, and this is where we're going to start. I've got 3 of his sort of works here. There's technically 4, but we're just going to talk about 3. The Battle of Yarmuk. This was actually his master's thesis, and it was reviewed by, I believe, Victor Davis Hanson, which is really cool. And it is about the Battle of Yarmuk. And you're probably asking yourself, what the fuck is Battle of Yarmuk? This was, if not the most critical battle in early Islam, it was one of the most important battles that took place. And I think there was certainly a case to be made, and I think Raymond would make this argument that if it was not for the battle and the victory of the Bedouin Islamic tribes, if they did not win this fight, there may have never been any Islam. This was sort of a critical point where they defeated the Eastern Roman Empire in this pitched battle, obviously not completely. And it allowed and facilitated them to continue to move their westward expansion. What he does really in at its core, there is this mystery in the story at this battle. And the mystery is how on God's green earth did a group of sort of ragtag Bedouin tribesmen who had no logistical supply lines, who had very sort of obsolete weapons, how did they defeat in pitch battle, right? It's one thing to talk about like guerrilla warfare and Alexander the Great, for example, like trying to fight Arabian tribes and or in Afghanistan. That is one thing that is completely different. But how was it that they fought this pitch battle face to face with the Roman army, who had 1,000 years of military tradition, experience, expertise, writings? They had logistical supply lines. They were a professional army in every sense of the word or idea. They had armor, weapons, cavalry, infantry, you name it, they had it. There is absolutely no reason why the Romans should have lost this battle, and yet they did. And obviously, if you try to talk to anybody who is a Muslim or is a Muslim who studies Islamic history, they would more often than not argue, not this isn't ubiquitous, but they would more often argue that it was God's intervention. It was God's will. He wanted Islam to win, Allah, and he wanted his people to spread the Quran far and wide, which isn't, as a historian, is just not enough. So Raymond sets out to answer the question of how they won. I would say it's short. It's 50 pages long. In the first half of it, he specifically talks about what we know about the battle. He is constantly using contemporary source material to back up what he is saying. And that is a trend that he does with incredible skill throughout all of his work. Now you're probably asking yourself, like, doesn't every historian do that? Well, they should, but they don't. And it's very frustrating. And even when they do, they don't do it very well. Raymond has this unique capacity and skill to write his work and then inject the contemporary source material at the perfect moment. And it just really brings color and energy to the story that he's telling. And he really is getting that skill set up, if you will, in his master's thesis. And then the other half of the book, so after he talks about the battle, the other half of the book, he specifically goes into how and why he believes the Bedouin Islamic tribesmen were able to defeat this powerhouse of a Roman army. And he also, it's great, he talks about what other historians argue and why he thinks they are wrong. So again, quick read, you can get it on Amazon. It's a lot of fun. And it sort of is a great introduction to Raymond and his work. And then obviously the one that everybody kind of knows, if you watch this channel, my guess is you've read this or you've at least heard about it, Sword and Scimitar. I read this some years ago. It was released in 2018. So after I watched that debate with him and Hamid Debashi, I remember I was just so excited to get my hands on this book when it eventually came out. And this tracks the Islamic expansion. It's like 1,000. He basically covers 1,000 years of Islam, its fight against the West, some of the responses that the West had for the Islamic armies. He also dives into Islamic culture. And again, he doesn't just say, hey, this is what Muslims believe. This is what early Muslims were doing. He explicitly goes into the primary source material, Islamic primary source material, and brings it to bear to show you, like, hey, don't take my word for it. This guy is literally like saying that we would take thousands and thousands of slaves from all across Europe. And that was our modus operandi, for example. Again, he leverages a ton of primary source material in this book, and it makes it a really fun read. It doesn't really read like a history book. It reads more of like a sort of fictional. I mean, it's obviously it's nonfiction, right? But it reads like a novel. It's really engaging and exciting. I've got a ton of underlying stuff. I don't know why I was underlining. Maybe I was using it for some research I was doing back at school, but it's really fun. Like I said, he starts in the early Islamic period in the 7th century and then ends, I believe, in the mid 17th century, going through a whole host of different battles, characters. But again, he's constantly going back to the beliefs of Islam and what was inspiring or motivating them to do what they did. And then he really, something that he does all throughout, at least this and his other book that I'm going to talk about in a second, he ties what's going on in early Islam to what is happening today. And specifically when Al Qaeda or ISIS are on the pulpit addressing a bunch of fighters, they will quote someone or something or an individual or an event or battle that took place 1,000 years ago. And Raymond ties all of this together really cohesively. And it just makes the story even more compelling and more gripping. That's Sword and Scimitar. Defenders of the West is his most recent book. And it's honestly kind of a follow-up-ish of Sword and Scimitar. What I mean by that is he kind of goes back into the same subject matter. Some of the individuals that he talks about in this, he just goes into more detail on each individual. So every chapter is broken down into a specific biography of a fighter, a warrior who fought back against Islam in the name of the Crusades, of taking back Christian lands and protecting Christian pilgrims. It's phenomenal. Same thing. It's not that it's an easy read, but it's just engaging and it's so fun that you forget that you're reading history, which is a mark of a very skilled writer and historian. And once again, the use of contemporary source, primary source material is excellent. I mean, he's one of the best. The other thing that is so much fun and just honestly like a breath of fresh air is he's willing to go to places that other historians that are writing about these periods are just not willing to go. He's willing to say the things that no other historian is willing to say, not because he's trying to be provocative. He's just trying to be honest. He's just pointing out the reality of the situation. He's merely pointing out fact. And so far as I could tell, there are very few historians in academia who want to go toe to toe with him because he would absolutely mop their faces with the floor. And that's exactly what he did in the debate with Hamid Debashi. It's a really fascinating watch, simply because in the beginning, Hamid Debashi clearly is just not prepared for the debate. He thinks he can just go in there and he's got whatever information stowed away in his big brain to combat whatever Raymond is going to say. And Raymond just is an absolute unit. He's a powerhouse in this debate. And the best part is Raymond remains completely calm and chill throughout the whole thing. And as the debate progresses, Hamid Debashi just loses his mind. By the end of the debate, he's so flustered because he's never had to argue with anybody. He's gone into his classes. He's talked down to his students, and everybody in his office within the Middle Eastern department in Columbia, they all believe the exact same thing. There's no dissension. There's no disagreement. And so when he has to go up against Raymond, he gets absolutely crushed, which frankly just shows how weak academia is in terms of their arguments, particularly within the field of history. The very last thing I will say, and forgive me, I got to pull up, I can't remember the name of it. Raymond has another book coming out, which is going to be awesome. Same subject matter, crusading. And it's called The Two Swords of Christ by Raymond Ibrahim. 5 centuries of war between Islam and the warrior monks of Christendom. And that is going to be released in November. You can pre-order it now on Amazon. I'm going to pre-order it probably today, even though I have more books that I need to get through. Anyways, I hope you guys got something out of this. If I were you, I would read it in the order these came out. I would start with the Battle of Yarmuk, and then I would read Sword and Scimitar, and then I would read Defenders of the West. You don't have to, by the way, you can read them completely out of order, which is what I did, but that would be my recommendation because they kind of build off of each other. With that said, my one critique, this isn't really a critique at all, actually. My one wish would be that Raymond would actually pick one of the individuals from this book, whether that's Richard Lionheart or Godfrey of Bouillon, and write like a 1,000-page book and really get into the nitty-gritty detail, because he has access to such a wealth of information regarding specifically like the primary source material that it's absolutely incredible. I mean, you and I can try to go find the stuff, and it's very difficult to locate. And then you've got to go through thousands of pages of history to find these specific points that are really what we want to read. And he knows exactly where they are. He's an expert. He's been studying this stuff his entire life. So, anyways, I hope you have enjoyed this episode of Vet Bros Drinking Caffeine, talking about historians. Like I said, if you got a better name for that, help me out. I'll see you next time. I'm Zach Masick. This is the Dead Warrior Society.